All right. So I'll introduce myself, even though most of you know me. My name is Ben Thomason. I am a second-year PhD student in the American Culture Studies program here at BGSU. And today I'm going to be talking about the documentary that you all just saw. And hopefully those of you on Zoom also got to see it as well before coming here. This started just as a class paper, and it was really just a political economy of me trying to figure out who made this documentary and how. So main research questions were just, what's the exact space that this documentary was filmed in, made in, who exactly funded it, and who exactly was the audience for this, who was it made for? And I found that it was a very small part of a much, much bigger operation. So I wanted to give some context for this, a historical parallel here. And looking at Syria and what America and the West has done in Syria, been involved in more broadly, I'd say that the parallel you can draw is with Afghanistan in the 1980s. There. So, in the 1980s, the US government, the CIA, implemented what was called Operation Cyclone. Began under Jimmy Carter and accelerated under Reagan. And this was the US, with the help of Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, spending billions of dollars to arm and train what was called the Mujahedeen in Afghanistan. It was a spectrum of Salafi jihadist groups, many of whom were native Afghans, many of whom were also from other Muslim majority countries. This is the general milieu that the Taliban was formed in, and also where Al-Qaeda was formed. Osama bin Laden got his start in Afghanistan, being part of this Operation Cyclone Mujahedeen rebellion against the socialist government of Afghanistan, which was backed by the Soviets at the time. The point was to give the Soviets their own Vietnam. In Syria in the 2010s, you have Operation Sycamore, which involved many similar methods and actors. This was a multi-billion-dollar program involving the US flooding Syria with weapons, largely with the help of Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and also facilitated by Jordan and Turkey, and also the United Arab Emirates. Now, in Operation Cyclone, famously, the Mujahideen were given anti-aircraft Raytheon manufactured Stinger missiles. In the Syrian Civil War, militias that we picked out were given Raytheon manufactured BGM TOW missiles, anti-tank missiles. So there's a lot of different groups in the rebel opposition fighting against the Syrian government. But very quickly, within about a year, by 2012, the whatever more liberal democratic elements of this opposition, of these rebels, are quickly eclipsed by various Islamist Salafi jihadist groups, similar to in ideology to Al-Qaeda. So there's a lot of these, but a few that you should know are Jabhat al-Nusra, which is the actual, here on the left, is the actual Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria. It's the Al-Qaeda franchise in Syria. And there is also Arar al-Sham, which is more of a Taliban style in that they have a similar ideology to Al-Qaeda, but they do not have ambitions outside of Syria. They want to establish Sharia law in Syria, and they do not have ambitions outside of it, similar to how the Taliban does not have ambitions outside of Afghanistan. Now, with al-Nusra, we tried to avoid giving them support and arms. Arar al-Sham, also, we tried to avoid giving them support and arms. We did covertly run public relations for them and do comms support, communication support for them. But al-Zanki, the Nur al-Din al-Zanki movement, or just al-Zanki, we actually did give not just comm support to, but we gave them anti-tank missiles, we gave them arms. They were part of the official opposition that we were supporting, that we should be supporting. And al-Zanki was allied at various different times with either Arar al-Sham or al-Nusra. During the time that the documentary was created, they were allied under the joint command structure of Jaish al-Fatah. So these people essentially believe that Syria is only for Sunni Arabs. Sunni is a major branch of Islam, but there's a problem with that because Syria is actually a fairly diverse place. It is majority Sunni Arab, yes, it's about 60%, but there's also 10 to 15% are Alawites, which is a Shia sect, and they are based largely in the West Coast here. And this is where President Bashar al-Assad, the leader, the dictator of Syria, this is his sect. He's from a minority sect. There's also 10% Kurds in the north. They are, for the most part, Sunni themselves. And there's also about 10% of the country is Christians. And the other 5% is a mixture of Druze, Ismailis, Yazidis, and various other much smaller, more esoteric, I guess you could call, sects, religions. In fact, Syria is the only place in the world where there are 4 villages, 4 small towns in Syria where Western Aramaic is still spoken, which is the biblical language that Jesus spoke. So because of their sectarianism, a lot of these national minorities are drawn towards this side of Assad. They feel threatened by these Sunni Arab ethno-nationalists, you could call them. So some background on the situation in Syria, what's going on in the country during the making of this film. So in April 2013, ISIS, which was originally part of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, splits from Al-Qaeda, crosses the border into Syria, and because they prove themselves to be more effective fighters and more well-organized and more dedicated to this global jihadist movement, they quickly eclipse all the other Sunni Arab militias in Syria, especially in the eastern part of the country. Many of the Sunni militias that we were supporting turned into local warlords and strongmen who were just fine with taking over their local neighborhood and holding it. They weren't as interested in, going on an entire war, trying to take another town down the road. They're fine with taking their own territory and holding it that way. So by September of 2015, the situation is very bad for the Assad government. The western part of the country is where most of the population lives. ISIS looks very big here, but most of this is just desert. So Russia intervenes in September 30th, 2015, and they essentially carve out this area in the western part of Syria to essentially cease the advance of ISIS and cease the advance of these rebel groups. to protect Damascus, to protect the Alawite communities in the West. And so that's the whole country. But the documentary itself is filmed specifically in Aleppo. So what's going on there in 2016 when this is made? Now, this is the most detailed map I could find. It comes from the Carter Center. They did not have a report for 2016, but from everything I've been able to gather, the situation does not start changing significantly until the second half of 2016. And that's important because what the film shows you is the end of the Battle of Aleppo. So in 2012, the Al-Tawhid Brigade, which is a Muslim Brotherhood affiliated Qatari-backed militia, invades the city from the outside. There is not a local uprising that happens in Aleppo. Aleppo was Syria's largest city. It had over 2 million people in it when the battle began, and it was responsible for about 50% of their industrial output. And this becomes known as Syria's Stalingrad. It's the most violent part of the war. And because of this, very importantly, there are no foreign journalists, there are no Western journalists operating on the ground in Aleppo. The Western creators of that documentary that you just saw did not go to Aleppo. They did not go into Syria at all. In fact, the director says it would have been just reckless and irresponsible for us to go into Syria because of how violent it was. But as you can see here, it is a very divided spectrum of different militias that switch control from neighborhood to neighborhood. You can go down the street for a couple miles and suddenly you're under someone else's militia. Someone else controls it. It's not unified, not coherent, and it's largely dominated by these Salafi, Sunni, Arab militia groups. Now, so that's the space that the white helmets are operating in. They are working under these conditions, and they only operate in opposition-held territory. And in fact, specifically only operate in these Sunni Arab militia territories for the most part. Now, because of that, common accusations against the white helmets that you will find online if you go searching for them pretty easily is that, one, they work with terrorists and that they are terrorists, which is true to the extent that they operate under these militias. They need to have the permission of these militias to operate under, which does not necessarily mean that there is not good humanitarian work that can be done there in terms of saving people from rubble, dealing with fires, things like that. There is evidence that they are more kindred with these militias than they lead on. There is photo and video evidence of, for example, them celebrating the taking of Idlib city, as you can see here in the left, with al-Nusra, which is Al-Qaeda in Syria, waving the al-Nusra flag there. They also led chants and marches in favor of Jaish al-Fatah, which is again dominated by al-Nusra and Darar al-Sham at the time, and they are on camera leading the chants there. There's also other photos of them carrying guns, mutilating dead Syrian soldiers' bodies, also facilitating public executions that are public summary executions that are carried out by some of these Salafi groups. And the other major accusation against them is that they fake their rescue missions. Now, this is one of the most famous episodes that leads to these accusations. This is from a video that was uploaded online and then quickly deleted, which they explain as a mannequin challenge video. I'm going to try to play that. Okay, so that did come out in 2016 when the Mannequin Challenge was a popular sensation online. Normally it involved high school students, and they usually played the song Black Beatles by Ray Shrimmered. Obviously, they did not play Black Beatles in that video. They played some very disturbing sound effects there, which are clearly sound effects in that video. So, who made the white helmets? Oh, that's what I wanted to get into here. There's the White Helmets, the group, which is made by this group on the left. And then there's the White Helmets, the film, which is these photos, these images on the right. Starting with the White Helmets, the group, there is this English government contractor named ARC, Analysis Research Knowledge, that sells itself as a conflict resolution and data analytics and humanitarian organization. Part of this group called ARC, one of the employees of it was this man named James LeMessurier, who was a military intelligence officer of the UK, who got his start in the Kosovo bombing campaign during the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s. He then moved on to do private security work for various Arab Gulf monarchies, including Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. And they organized the Syrian Civil Defense, the White Helmet rescue teams in 2012. But in 2014, they officially create the White Helmets as they are famously known today. He is credited as the founder of the White Helmets and becomes their public face in the media. And he also creates Mayday Rescue, which is initially based in the UAE, but moves to the Netherlands. And through Mayday Rescue, European governments and the US funneled over 100 million euros into the White Helmets. Mayday Rescue was the one who was training and equipping them. Now, the documentary itself was funded and marketed by this group called the Syria Campaign, which was started with money by a man named Ayman Asfari. Ayman Asfari is a Syrian expat who was educated in the West, educated in America, I believe, who is a billionaire CEO of Petrofac, a British oil company. Now, Petrofac, just earlier this year, admitted to paying billions of dollars in bribes to the Saudi Arabian and United Arab Emirates governments in return for billion-dollar oil contracts. And so at the same time, they are marketing this movie. Big theme of it is stopping the bombing. That's a big theme of the movie, that the West should do something about the violence that's being done there. And what the Syria campaign is calling for during this time is a no-fly zone, which would have involved, by defense estimates, using about 70,000 US troops to maintain the airspace and make sure no one is flying there, which means, because Russia is intervening in there, shooting down Syrian and Russian planes and possibly going to war against Russia. Now, since the Western directors didn't go to Syria and film there, who did film there? Well, it was White Helmet members themselves who filmed there, and they were given equipment and funded and taught how to use their equipment by this French government Canal France International Syria Media Incubator, which was French government paying for a media office in Turkey, bringing journalists in there, training them on how to use equipment, giving them equipment to use, and then sending them back into Syria to create news for not just Syrians, but also for the West, because again, there are no Western journalists to report on the ground here. So two of the cinematographers, Hassan Katan, is initially funded by the Syrian Media Incubator. Then he founds the Aleppo Media Center, which also gets funding from the French government. And AMC trains the other cinematographer, the other cameraman, Khalid Khatib. So all of that is public record. You need to do a lot of digging for it, but it's like literally on their LinkedIn profiles. It's not hidden. It's not covert. Now, this was, though, part of a larger operation that was covert. And ARC was heavily involved in it, was a big leader in this operation. So this operation, using over $100 million, involved an expanded version of what I just explained with the French government efforts there. Basically, ARC would pick out not just journalists, but also militia leaders and teach them how to talk to the media, get them in contact with journalists. They said they had a network of over 1,600 foreign journalists that they could get stories from Syria and bring and contact them directly to get them out into the Western press. So this involves setting up over 100 media stringers, which are basically freelance journalists, setting up radio stations, over a dozen of them, setting up about a dozen magazines, some of which are the most popular magazines in the country, in the rebel, at least in the rebel-held territories. They're printing hundreds of thousands of these magazines and propaganda flyers, and they're even setting up TV stations, setting up municipal councils. They set up the website for the Free Syrian Army. They set up the website for the Syrian government in exile that they're trying to promote. And they're also setting up public services, police forces. The white helmets are very important for this because they clear rubble. They create security on the ground. They deal with fires. They even deal with, they set up sanitation services too. And all the while they're doing this, they're doing focus groups and polls and all sorts of data analytics, gathering all the data they can on various target audiences, both in Syria and in the region and in the West that they are trying to reach with this. The way I've been explaining it is, imagine if some rebels took over Bowling Green and maybe Toledo and held it for a few years. People still had to go about their everyday lives to some extent. So you have to set up some degree of infrastructure and security. But then imagine that the Chinese or the Russian government is coming in and teaching these rebels how to talk to their media. They're coaching them on what to say. They are setting up offices for them, setting up police forces for them, setting up TV, radio, magazines, all sorts of a whole media and civil society infrastructure through foreign funding. That's the kind of situation that they're creating here. And these maps are from the documents that were leaked by the hacktivist group Anonymous, which you may have heard of. And these were released just last year in September. It's been about exactly a year since they've been released, actually. Now, I wanted to give an example of how this worked. So you may remember RFS, people who did that Mannequin challenge video, Revolutionary Forces of Syria. Well, these documents say directly that RFS was run directly by the Global Strategy Network up on the top left. And you can look up their website. It's a homepage and an email, and that's it. There's nothing else on the Global Strategy Network's website. But its director is Richard Barrett, who is the former director of counterterrorism at MI6, which is the British CIA. So this is essentially seems to be both the Global Strategy Network and RFS seems to be a MI6 cutout, intelligence cutout. They had a couple other media storms back in 2016, the most successful of which was this hashtag Syriago campaign, which was released 2 weeks after Pokemon Go came out, and it involved having children hold up pictures of popular Pokemon and saying on the piece of paper, "I'm in Aleppo, save me. I'm in Syria, save me." They also superimposed images of Pokemon just onto images of Syria, like you see here with what they do with Captain America. They also did that with Pokemon. And this Pokemon Go thing got stories in Vice News, CNN, Washington Post, Huffington Post, BBC, Guardian, and Al Jazeera. And those names come up several times in their leaked documents saying that they have regular contact with these media outlets and regularly feed stories to them. The hashtag Avengers in Aleppo campaign was much less successful. It did not line up with a Marvel movie release, and it only got a story in the New York Post. So, stepping back for a moment, what's going on here? What's the big picture here? Well, what I can say right now is that so the West is flooding Syria with billions of dollars worth of guns and arms and fighters, and continue to do so even as more and more of these guns and fighters are going to Al-Qaeda in Syria, going to ISIS. And at the same time they're doing this, they need to sell an image of the Syrian opposition that is palatable to, well, to the Western public. So they need to give an image of effective, unified, liberal, secular, tolerant opposition. So they're trying to give you this distorted picture, but at the same time, they are operating on the ground in Syria to try to make that distorted picture a reality. They actually are talking about like promoting democracy, promoting gender sensitivity is a big one that they say, because they are working with people who they admit themselves are extremist in all but name. That's a direct quote from one of the documents. So they are actually trying to make them more palatable. At the same time, they're trying to sell a more palatable image. How much time I got? Okay. Nice. Last slide, actually. So I wanted to end this with the end of James LeMessurier and the end of Mayday. The intelligence officer who supposedly founded the White Helmets and ran the NGO, the nonprofit that was giving them training and funding. So this is a very small world that these people are operating in. In 2018, James LeMessurier marries his third wife, Emma Weinberg, here on the left. She is the daughter of a BP oil executive, and she worked for the Foreign Commonwealth Office, which also employed ARC, which also employed James LeMessurier. And in 2015, she founded IncoStrat, which was one of the partner organizations that was involved deeply in this whole propaganda and civil society organization. His second wife was actually the program manager for ARC, for this propaganda operation. So while he's running the White Helmets and funding them and training them, his second wife, who apparently he divorces, is making sure that the propaganda is hitting the right notes and is hitting the right notes at the right time. Now, in 2018, that same year, things start going badly for him. The Netherlands government, which is where Mayday is based, does an investigation into what it is supporting. They give millions of dollars to Mayday, and they also gave millions of dollars to Syrian opposition groups and millions of dollars in aid to the Free Syrian Police, one of these police forces that they were trying to set up there. And they say that Mayday's finances are totally shoddy, that their finances, their accounting is not on the up and up. It's not trustworthy. That the Free Syrian Police and the White Helmets are very likely that they maintain connections with and collaborate with terrorist groups. And they also label the Levant Front, which was very active in Aleppo at the time, and they were giving millions of dollars to, they labeled the Levant Front as a terrorist organization, despite their past support for it. And this leads them to also cut off aid to both the White Helmets and to the Free Syrian Police and the opposition generally. Now, that same year, James also gets in trouble for misplacing $50,000 from the Mayday funds. Now, then an audit of Mayday uncovers that him and Emma Weinberg, who was also a director at Mayday, they were naming their own salaries. They did not have anyone supervising how much money they were making. And they named their salaries at over $300,000 a year, which is way above what someone who's running a nonprofit, who's getting government money, should be making. And not only that, but they are taking monthly bonuses in cash from the Mayday finances. So between the two of them, while White Helmet members are being paid $150 a month to make propaganda, to dig people out of rubble, to sometimes facilitate public executions, they are making easily $1 million a year doing this work. Not only that, they're apparently not paying taxes in the Netherlands, and they are running several for-profit ventures on top of their supposed nonprofit, Mayday. So in 2019, in November, James has to admit to this. He has to go to his donors, go to the send an email, send a letter to the US, British, German, Netherlands, all these Western European and American, Canadian also governments, saying what happened and what he's been up to. So he does that. He begs them not to investigate any further because it might make the White Helmets look very bad, and it might make the governments that funded the White Helmets look very bad. And 3 days later, this is the official story, that he jumps off the roof of his 3rd-story apartment in Istanbul to his death. Authorities rule it a suicide, but all these rumors immediately start flying from both sides of the war that he was killed by Assad, he was killed by the Syrians, that he was killed by Putin, that he was killed by the CIA, that he was killed by MI6. But officially, Turkish authorities rule it a suicide. People also say that Turkey assassinated him too. The next year, 2020, the Netherlands drops their investigations into Mayday. Mayday declares bankruptcy and dissolves, and the media begins a media campaign that involves podcasts and all sorts of long stories, profiles on James the Measurer, to try to canonize him, to make him look like a saint, and that essentially he was cyberbullied into killing himself because of the Assad and Russian trolls who were spreading all this fake news about him. Now, in conclusion, I will say, because I've gone on too long now, that I think this is a great example of how regime change operations work in the 21st century in our contemporary world, and with many echoes of US's history of wars, coups, and covert operations, particularly in Muslim-majority nations. And I think this also is a great demonstration of how news and entertainment, popular culture can be complicit and even actively collaborate with these covert and overt operations. and also how progressive values of human rights and humanitarianism can be twisted and weaponized to wage war, essentially. Thank you. Okay, only went 5 minutes over, but we got plenty of time for you, Dr. Boyd-Barrett. So I'll stop sharing. If you need me to share your PowerPoint, or if you can share it yourself, I think you should have that.
Yes. Should I try to see whether I can share it, Ben?
Yeah, sure. And then I'll just
yeah, hang on a second. I think I had it on my desktop a moment ago, but I have to press share screen. So let me try to do that. No, it does tell me that the host has disabled screen sharing.
Okay. Yeah, let me make co-host. Okay, you should be able to now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's gonna work. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I can introduce you now before.
Sure. Okay, Ben.
All right.
Go ahead.
So yeah, this is Dr. Oliver Boyd-Barrett. He is a professor emeritus of Bowling Green State University from the Department of Journalism. He was educated in the UK, received his PhD from the Open University, has written over 20 books, or written or co-edited over 20 books, written approximately 150 articles, and specializes in propaganda and media imperialism. And I've had the pleasure of delving into some of his more recent books that have a wonderful amount of history and analysis in them. He currently teaches part-time at California State University in the Channel Islands, so he is coming to us from the West Coast today.
Okay.
So you can take it away, Oliver.
Okay. Thank you, Benjamin. Let me know if there's any issue with the sound or anything like that.
Yeah, you're coming through clear now.
Oh, good. I really appreciated your presentation, Ben. You're really doing great work.
Thank
and
you.
I really hope to see it published as soon as possible. This is so important, the ground that you are covering. And I think the best way that I can relate to it here in the time that I have is just to provide a bit more background with respect to the conflict in Syria, the context in which this information war, which it is largely, it is an information war, is being fought. So I need to start my slideshow from the current slide. So 2 or 3 main themes behind what I have to say this evening. One is that these mainstream media and establishment originated narratives of war often seem to work through obscuring of context. That's one thing. Second of all, I think what we see in Syria is a prime example of what is now increasingly being called human rights imperialism. That is to say, using or manufacturing issues of human rights as a pretext for imperialist intervention. And this, of course, takes place within the broader context of what is now, at the very least, 76 years of US and NATO intervention in and around the world in all manner of different ways. But in the context of Syria, we see human rights imperialism being carried out, with respect to the stories that are told about Bashar Assad, about his presumed crimes, particularly as these relate to allegations of his use of chemical weapons, particularly as they relate to allegations of his mistreatment of prisoners, and allegations of his overall, his supposed overall authoritarianism. And the third theme, I'm increasingly regarding Syria as an initial weaponization of the Arab Spring, the events that took place in 2010 and 2011 in Tunisia and in Egypt, a few months in advance of Libya and then Syria. And I'm willing to give some credibility to the idea that the uprising in Tunisia was a genuine uprising, although I have my doubts because I visited the US Embassy in Tunis not very long before these events broke out. And even then, I detected an unusual sense of enthusiasm and optimism as to the radical nature of the change that it was hoped Tunisia would soon experience. Where did that enthusiasm, where did that optimism come from? Interesting. And then Egypt too, perhaps to some extent a genuine uprising, particularly as it relates to the Muslim Brotherhood. But here in the West, the mainstream media, drawing on the propaganda achievement of their coverage of the supposed irregularities in the elections in Iran in 2009, you remember it was said that Ahmadinejad, a president very unpopular in the West, he was standing for re-election. There was a great deal of unrest on the streets, and this was the first time that we were introduced to the notion of a Twitter revolution, which was an utterly absurd bit of nonsense, because barely anyone actually in Iran subscribed to Twitter or had the technology whereby to use it. And much of, as we later discovered, much of the messaging that was related to Twitter and other social media actually came from overseas addresses that were pretending to be coming from Iran. So we see similar tricks going on in Egypt in particular. So by this time, however, the narrative, the fantasy of the Twitter revolution, the fantasy of the Twitter revolution has been established, and I think at that point it is used, it is weaponized to provoke uprisings in both Libya and in Syria. So those are the principal themes. I won't have time to unpack all of them in the time that I have available. So let me go back to the notion of the absence of context. I never cease to be amazed by how much more insight you derive with respect to any international, or for that matter, national conflict, violent conflict, where one's perspective is not radically changed if one steps back just a few years before the point at which Western mainstream media pick up the narrative. It is absolutely extraordinary. And so Syria is no different in this respect. Well, what would be this additional context, and how might that affect the way in which one understood reporting of the conflict? So first we have to understand that Syria has experienced imperial meddling for at least since World War I. At the time of the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, Syria was part of the Ottoman Empire, and the French are given authority to rule Syria for much of the period between the First and the Second World Wars. And Britain is in Iraq, and Britain is in Palestine, and so on. And after World War II, in addition to constant French and British meddling in this part of the world, the United States weighs in, and we see United States involvement. Later on, it becomes CIA involvement in a succession of different coups that is experienced in Syria from 1942 onwards. And then Israel joins the party, was certainly not later than 2007, when Israel takes it upon itself to bomb what it claims is the construction of a nuclear energy reactor in Syria. But judging from the nonsense, of course, that we'd already experienced with respect to so-called weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, who on earth would believe anything the West had to say about Syria and potential nuclear energy or nuclear initiatives in Syria? And then, as time goes on, we see more and more intervention in Syrian events from Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Jordan. Two other major points of context that are so conveniently forgotten in the mainstream media telling of the tragic Syrian conflict since 2011. First off is the role of Bashar Assad's father, Hafiz Assad, whose Ba'athist semi-socialist regime came under attack, very significant attack in many locations from the Muslim Brotherhood. There were terrible terrorist acts committed against regime politicians and the Syrian army and Syrian police and so on. There was no option other than to hit back. Hafiz Assad successfully did hit back and wiped out much of the Muslim Brotherhood armed opposition in around, I'm going to say, 1985. But all we ever hear about in the Western mainstream media is how this brutal dictator Hafiz Assad wiped out supposed innocence in 1985. Then another peculiarity in this story is that Bashar Assad, who is of course painted, almost no one dares, even on the left, to talk about Bashar Assad in terms that don't imply that he is the most horrible imaginable human being. And that is rooted in both in the utmost ignorance and also the utmost hypocrisy. First of all, Bashar Assad, let us note, is quite warmly welcomed by the West when he comes to power. He succeeds his father, Hafiz, in the year 2000. He wasn't groomed to be the leader, but as a result of the death of his elder brother in a car crash, he came back from London, where he had been practicing as an eye doctor, ophthalmologist, to lead the Syrian nation. And he's quite warmly welcomed because he is a breath of fresh air. And he does sound as though he's someone who could very likely introduce greater political and economic liberalization in Syria. But this honeymoon of warm reception to the arrival of Bashar Assad on the scene, even despite the fact that he is quite sympathetic to the United States and to its recovery from the shock of 9/11, just as his father had been quite helpful to the United States in the first Gulf War. But those gestures of attempted gestures at friendliness coming from countries that the United States has over decades decided to hate, Iran would be the other classic example, mean absolutely nothing to the foreign policy establishment in in Washington. And then 2002, out of the blue, we're told that Syria is a member of the axis of evil, that other nonsensical propaganda slogan so successfully launched under George Bush in 2002. By this time, as we knew in 2006 from Wesley Clark, who was the main presidential candidate, or was a significant presidential candidate standing against Bush for his second term, Wesley Clark revealed that he had known since after the 9/11 attacks of 2001 that there were plans afoot to take down 7 Muslim nations in 5 years. And that was confirmed by the Chilcot inquiry in Great Britain, which reported in 2010, after many years of deliberation, far too many. And I think that was published in 2011. And they confirm the existence of these plans. It's almost certain that they existed well before 2001, by the way. Just as we know from the neoconservative plan for a new American century that published its report in 2000, that was just yearning for a 9/11 type event that would justify precisely the kind of plans that the neoconservatives already had in place, and that included Syria. So this is part of the background that very, very few people even dare to touch when we're looking at the broader context of our relations to Syria. Not least also thinking about Bashar Assad and his image in the West. He was popular with us for a short period. He's always been pretty popular in Syria itself. And there have been, the election results and polling have consistently shown that within the areas controlled by the Syrian government, Bashar Assad has maintained a very high degree of approval. So is it true, therefore, that despite this very high level of approval, that he can possibly be the ogre that Western mainstream media and all their sycophants like to pretend that he is? Well, no, not at all. I'm not pretending that there are not problems with Syria, but the first thing that seems to me totally obvious to anyone who's ever visited or studied the Middle East is that he's a fairy prince, by contrast to many of his US supported colleagues in this region, including Saudi Arabia, including Egypt, now under Sisi, of course, Qatar, Jordan, Israel. These are not, in my view, even Israel, these are not astounding success stories of democracy in action. And it's actually repugnant that spokesmen from these countries stand up and claim to be struggling against Syria for the cause of for greater democracy in Syria. There could be no worse or more egregious lie than that if we're trying to understand what this conflict in Syria is really all about. How's my time going, Ben? About 5 more minutes or so? Benjamin?
Sorry, I was sitting down. Yeah, you can take 10 more minutes.
Yes, okay. There's no way that I'm going to be able to tell the full story here, so I will do my best to cover one or two other important aspects to this. First, no one likes to remember that Syria, under both Hafiz Assad and Bashar Assad, this was a Ba'athist regime. I concede that in recent years, particularly in the pit of war, I concede that Syria's claim to maintaining a socialist structure, because that is what Baathism is. It's a form of socialism that is adapted or is intended to adapt to pan-Arabic secular. Let us not forget that many of these surrounding countries are far from secular. They are religious and theocratic regimes. Syria is also an egalitarian society, particularly with respect to the genders. I'm not pretending that Syria manages to overcome all of the issues and problems associated with patriarchy in this part of the world, but it's so much friendlier environment for gender relations than is the case, for example, in Saudi Arabia, whom we adore, of course. We can't even bring ourselves to accuse Saudi Arabia of having any involvement whatsoever in the events of 9/11. Likewise, we should note in passing that not only under Ba'athist socialism, you've got credible attempts to provide free education, free health service, free or subsidized housing for all the people, not just the Alawite minority, not at all. The Alawites are strong in Syria precisely because they, as a minority, have a reputation of being able to work with other minorities and to defuse potential tension, at least until the provoked civil war of 2011 between the dominant Sunni and the minority Shia and the other ethnic and religious groups that Benjamin, you covered very, very well in your address. In many respects, Libya, which suffered the same fate just a few months prior to Syria, was the same. It was the most advanced black, or I should say non-white country in Africa. Again, free housing, free education, quite radical attempts to introduce new forms of democracy, which are always laughed at and caricatured by supposed Western mainstream media experts who should know but don't know much better than they do. So Syria, and there's much to be said about Libya too, that one could also say about Syria. And everyone laughed at the time when Gaddafi complained about the role of al-Qaeda amongst the rebels against his regime. But they were there. And of course, their weapons and Libyan government weapons helped to furnish the timber Sycamore, CIA-funded timber Sycamore routes of weapons and material through Turkey down into Syria. Even before this kind of thing was going on, before the supposed pro-democracy uprising began to occur in the summer and fall of 2011 in Syria, there were jihadist preachers beaming in from Saudi Arabia, inciting the jihadists, the Muslim Brotherhood and the others to rise up. And weapons too were coming over the border before the supposed pro-democracy uprising. All of these things are now shrouded in mist, or at least that is how the mainstream media would like to pretend that they are. Final thought then is picking up on this theme of the human rights imperialism and the role that the allegations about the use of chemical weapons have played in this narrative. And I've looked, my book, by the way, is coming out, Conflict Propaganda in Syria, Competing Narratives. It should be out by Routledge by the end of this year, I'm hoping. And I look at the three major events, the three major occurrences, so-called occurrences of Syrian government use of chemical weapons in Syria. East Ghouta in 2013, Khan Shaykhun in 2017, Douma in 2018. And there is no evidence there there are very disturbing and worrying possibilities relating to the bodies that are found in these places and where those bodies came from, and thinking particularly of the most recent in Duma, who killed the peoples whose bodies they were, and what role might the White Helmets have played in staging one or more of these events, in providing the bodies, either directly or more likely indirectly from one of the other jihadist groups operating in Idlib, where there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people kept in captivity, easily available for slaughter. So their warm bodies could be shipped further south to provide the necessary evidence of chemical weapons attacks. And now we have, and here I will need to come to an end. We have the Opcw scandal, whose own inspectors in Duma said there is no evidence of a chemical weapons attack. There is evidence of staging, and then the Opcw covers this up. It fabricates the findings of its own inspectors. And we consequently, not before time, we consequently see that all this charade of international investigation, these respectable international regulatory bodies accountable to the United Nations, you can't trust any of them. There's no reason to trust any of them because there's no chain of custody. You can't see the points at which intervention may occur from interested parties. And the whole structure of international relations is, in any case, it's biased towards the interests of the leading imperial power and its acolytes, principally the nations that make up the membership of NATO, along with a few other sort of string-alongs. I'll have to close it at that, and thank you for the time, and hopefully there's time for one or two questions.
Okay, hopefully everyone can still hear me. Great, wonderful presentation. Just like your books, you put a ton of truth just spit out there like a shotgun at once. I love it. Yeah, are there any questions from anyone in the audience, either physically present here or on Zoom? Feel free to speak up or put it in the chat if you're on Zoom, or raise your hand if you're here. Yeah, Steve in the back.
Where do you see the Syrian war going from here in the terms of how do you see it ending?
Okay. His question, you probably couldn't hear, was where do we see the Syrian Civil War going from here? How do we see it ending? Would you like to pick up that one?
A couple of, well, three main thoughts. So the United States is still in there. Biden is not making any noises that I'm aware of to withdraw the remaining troops that we have in Syria. We're using the Kurds to take custody of Syrian oil and gas and the most productive agricultural region of Syria. So Syria's most precious, the state's most precious possessions are being held by the Kurds under the authority of the United States. And frankly, I don't see that coming to an end anytime soon, short of some remarkable rapprochement. That's not going to happen anytime soon either, between the United States and Russia, which is Syria's main partner in providing whatever security the state currently has. So that's all very worrying. So as the constant there are still plenty of ISIS groups, ISIS-related militia in Syria. So that war is not over either, and they are, because of the number of ISIS militia who are held in captivity in prisons that are also subject to the control of the Kurds in alliance with the United States. I see ISIS being a continuing tool that will be used in the most cynical ways possible by the United States in order to better achieve its interests. And we have the issue of the Turks. Turkey now controlling a huge ribbon of territory. No protest from anywhere in the rest of the international community, apparently, that Turkey is now occupying a country that doesn't belong to it. Nor is there any concern that Israel practically every day bombs something or somebody, just kills people murderously on the pretext, who knows what's true, on the pretext that here these soldiers or those Syrian soldiers are working alongside Hezbollah or working alongside Iranian soldiers. Where is international law? It's totally absent. It's a fiction.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that, I guess, to make it more clear that since 2015, Al-Qaeda and Arar al-Sham have been in control of the last rebel-held non-Kurdish part of Syria, which is Idlib province in the northwest. And they have essentially been under, I mean, like the Assad government has chipped away at their territorial control, but they are essentially under NATO protection, largely in the form of Turkey, which is NATO's, I believe, second largest military. Yeah, anyone else? Zoom chat, you can mute work too. Yeah.
Yeah, hello. I came from here accidentally today. I came from Turkey, and our neighbor is Iraq, Iran, and Syria. We have lots of problems, particularly 3 million refugees come our country. We have serious problem. Thank you for White Helm's film. I really like. It is very meaningful and important acting by maybe group. And then I think Russia support to Syria, but first of all, US support this war. And then two big countries. It also sometimes Turkey, my country, is guilty this war. They are guilty. Also my country, president and government. Because I against war. I'm a visiting scholar in your country now.
Okay.
Just 30 days ago I came. I want to peace in our area because all children, refugees, women, very deep emotional and physically destroyed. Thank you for attention this film. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the comments there, the kind words. Sorry if people didn't quite catch that. Okay, on there. Sounds like you guys picked it up a bit. Yeah, that's something we didn't get to talk about really at all, is the refugee crisis. I mean, I believe the largest refugee crisis since World War II resulted from what was done from this war in Syria. And, you know, I feel like we can be very Eurocentric in terms of like, we think all these refugees all ended up in Europe somehow, but no, it is largely the neighboring countries that these refugees ended up in. And even the ones who made it to Europe, I mean, we've seen how the European governments have reacted to it, and the rise of far-right Islamophobic ethno-nationalists in Europe and also in America, who didn't even accept many refugees and is largely responsible for creating many of them.
Might I just interject on that point, Ben? The extraordinary, not surprising, but extraordinary hypocrisy of the British government. Brexit, the politics of Brexit is very largely to do with the unhappiness of conservative voting Brits to the massive influx of people from former Central and Eastern Europe into Britain under globalization. So Brexit comes about in order to give the British government more control over who enters its borders. And then what happens within months of Brexit actually being executed, you have all of a sudden Britain appearing, putting on a show of great care and concern for potentially millions of Hong Kong Chinese fleeing the terrors of Britain, NATO, and the United States' new favorite enemy, China. And then most recently, I suppose, just to whitewash the ghastliness of their responsibility for the mess in Afghanistan, also pretending to similar concern for the potential influx of refugees from Afghanistan. It's just totally laughable.
Yeah, the activeness of Britain in these imperial adventures was quite shocking to me, because I guess as an American, I always kind of assumed that it's since World War II at least, it's been America that does these things, and Britain maybe just goes along with it. But if anything, this research here has taught me with the Foreign Commonwealth Office documents that they are very active and still fancy themselves as an imperial power. Right. Yeah, anyone else? Oh. Yeah, so yeah, Josh says, do you think Western countries will continue to use these adapted measures to influence nations abroad and opinions at home? Well, I can say, first of all, that what I really wanted to eventually connect my research into this to Latin America, because I think it's very relevant, what we did in the Middle East and what we've done in Latin America. For example, in some of these documents, one of the Twitter campaigns that they talk about is #SOS Aleppo, which is, you might remember from this year, there was an #SOS Cuba Twitter campaign, which initially started from a Spanish, from Spain Twitter account, and was involved heavy use of Twitter bots to spread it around. And they've done USAID, who was largely involved in funding the White Helmets and doing these operations in Syria, have also done things like try to start a Cuban spring. They tried to set up a Cuban Twitter that they could use to launch a Cuban spring. They funded anti-government rock concerts in Venezuela. Similar mobilization, weaponization of popular culture in the ways that you could have seen from some of these Syria operations. If you have anything to add, Oliver?
No, I can't offer a great deal of optimism. The historical moment, the greatest historical moment of opportunity to rewrite the rules of international relations was, of course, following dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1990 to 1991. And the United States immediately showed that it intended only to play the same old game and to take every advantage of being, for a period of time, the sole hegemonic power. I think the best that we can hope for is a drip by drip struggle to transform our culture of governance and the presumptions that we make as to what it is that we want as a species and how is the best way to get to what most of us actually want, and to bypass what I call the incubus we used to call it the military-industrial complex. Now, Ray McGovern, the ex-CIA analyst, he's a very good analyst on all matters international, and he now refers to Mickey Mat, and I can't at this moment remember all of the different agencies that Mickey Mat is supposed to include, but in addition to the old military and industrial parts, he also brings in Congress, which is more or less here in the United States, is in the pay of AIPAC. And AIPAC is simply spending the money that we send to Israel. And academe, because unfortunately, this very, very productive seminar tonight notwithstanding, the academic community is almost totally integrated into this complex of neoliberal, pro-plutocratic global dominance by the United States and its allies. It's an incubus, and so many hundreds of thousands of people are feeding out of this trough, out of this pig trough. It's very difficult to see one's way, but you just have to sustain hope and believe that ultimately, perhaps in combination with external factors as yet unseen, we can bring about real change.
Yeah, that's very good. In my research, I can definitely speak to the failure of many academics to be brave on these issues and to just go along with the narrative that people with money and power want them to go along with. I mean, one of the books that I was reading during my research was an academic who used the framing of the Atlantic Council, which is a major think tank that constantly pushes NATO wars, uses their own framing to talk about the fake news campaign that was pushed against the White Helmets and this disinformation, fake news, Russian troll campaign. And he's taking the words and the framing, the whole framing of the Atlantic Council to give his perspective on that. So it's really not even his perspective. It's more the Atlantic Council's perspective on these things.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, we need to get kicked out of here by 7:30, but we have time for another question or two, maybe, if anyone wants. Yeah.
I was kind of curious, with the manufactured consent and the sort of the Twitter campaign, stuff like that, and that type of stuff. This kind of stuff we're seeing with like the manufactured consent with China. Is this something that like the United States might take like similar steps that we saw them take with the White Helmets kind of thing, or the campaigns to like do this media kind of stuff? Is that like something that they might do in China, do you think, or Hong Kong?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the question is, are we doing, or can we do similar things? Can the U.S. government, are they doing similar things when it comes to China, perhaps with Hong Kong or with the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region? I won't say too much, but I will say that their a lot like Afghanistan, there are many foreign jihadists that come from various other countries in the Muslim world. And there are Chechen jihadists in Syria that have fought with ISIS. There are people from from North Africa, and there have been thousands of Uyghur jihadists from northwestern China that have fought in Syria and fought with Al-Qaeda, fought with ISIS, and are still active in Idlib, I believe. And so there's a great question there among, how did these Uyghurs get there? What are they going to do if they maybe start going back to other countries, or they go back to China? What are they doing? What are they going to be doing there? There have been, I believe, hundreds of terrorist attacks in China in the past 20, 30 years that have resulted in hundreds of deaths of civilians. And I've seen some of these videos, and they are pretty brutal attacks that have been carried out. And it has motivated a very a strong response from the Chinese government to deal with that. Would you like to add anything?
Yes, with respect to Xinjiang, I totally support everything you say. There is a real threat to China. It's not made up. But on the other hand, yes, we're talking about a total Uyghur population of 11 million. But 11 million people within a province, Xinjiang, of some 25 million. We're talking about very large numbers here. The scope for disinformation, for these information games of the type that we have seen in Syria, is just enormous. So there's nothing that we should take for granted from what the mainstream media tell us is going on in this part of the world. And let's never forget what should have been learned, but apparently hasn't been learned from our invasion and occupation of Iraq in 2003 on demonstrably false pretext, and other events. Not to mention the big lie of Russiagate. Now, we're not all yet on the same page on this, but we soon will be, I think, where it will be more than apparent that this is one of the most gigantic hoaxes that has been perpetrated in history. This whole Russiagate narrative. So in that kind of context, you need to be careful what you believe, the sources of information that you trust with respect to Xinjiang. I'll just end on this note. One of the problems is the deep anti-Chinese character of so many of the sources that are telling us about the so-called camps in Xinjiang. And another problem is the absurdity of the idea that China aims to depopulate the Uyghurs. Nothing could be more absurd when we're talking about a population that in the last 30 years has grown by 2 to 3 times. If that population has fallen back in recent times, it's most likely the result of much better birth control and health care facilities that have been introduced by Beijing in this province. And while we're talking about fall off in population, we should note that the number of Han Chinese in Xinjiang, that is the Han are, of course, the ethnic majority in China, and many of them work in Xinjiang, that their population has actually been falling more steeply than the population of the Uyghurs. So you have to look at some of this stuff and maintain very high degree of skepticism.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that is by design as well. Official Chinese policy, when they implemented the one-child policy in China to limit birth rates, they applied it most stringently to the Han Chinese, the majority population there. They allowed their national minorities, there are 55 recognized national minorities, I believe, in China. They allowed them Uyghurs, particularly in rural areas, to have more children. I believe, like with Tibetans, they were allowed to have as many children as they. There was no restriction on that at all.
Sure.
Yeah, so I really want to thank Dr. Oliver Boyd-Barrett for being here. You gave a wonderful talk, and I learned a lot, and it was great to meet you and talk with you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for being here, both physically and on Zoom. I really appreciate you all listening to me and him talk for about an hour and a half at this point. I guess I'll just end with some words saying that historians and academics and people in the media have often said that we're willing to talk about the bad things that America has done back in the 70s or back in the 60s, decades in the past. We're willing to talk about Iraq now. But there's this very frustrating assumption that after that, currently they don't do that anymore. That, oh, that was the 1980s, or oh, that was the 1970s. Now it's, oh, that was the 1990s. There's no way they're doing that anymore. But these operations that they've done in the past in history worked very well in a lot of ways. And there has been very little reason for them to stop doing them. Certainly, people in positions of wealth and power have not faced much accountability or consequences for their actions in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Iran, 1950s, Guatemala, whatever, however far you want to go back. So it's important to keep a skeptical, critical eye when it comes to massive conflicts and wars that have life and death implications for millions and millions of people.
Well said.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, thank you for listening. All right.
Thank you, Ben.
We'll see. Yeah, I will email you later and
Yeah, you
catch
bet.
up
You
on
bet.
things, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, have a good night, everyone.
You too. Bye now. Bye-bye.
Bye.